Greetings, Canadian Political Pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences, air quotes media podcasts, offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity a machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the Hurly-Burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
Greetings, you accursed. Welcome to Curse of Politics Daily. 20, mostly half-hour shows, Monday to Friday, from now until February 28th to cover Doug versus Bonnie, Marit and Mike in the Ontario general election. I say mostly half-hour shows because when there's an existential federal political issue to talk about, like today for fuck's sake, we'll go a little longer. Daily Curse features fresh daily polling from our friend, the quite brilliant Kyla Renellenfitch and Relay Strategies. And instead of the immortal Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous, we're bringing back Blessing or Curse to close out each of these election shows. All right, let's get to it. Hello, Scott Reid.
Oh, hello, David Herle.
Good to see you, my friend.
You look lovely today. It's gray. Your sweater's gray. Your hair is gray. Your skin is gray. It's a very gray panache.
I'm becoming shockingly ugly, and I appreciate you pointing that out on to everybody.
Listen,
hi.
They don't need me.
Fuck you. Hi, Jordan. How are you?
I'm so good. How are you doing? It's so fucking early.
It's unbelievably early. And hello and welcome to Deb Hutton, who will be with us right to the end of the election because Kory's shivering on a bus in Sudbury or Woodstock or Kinty West. Deb,
are you sure? Are you
us.
sure Kory's on the bus?
I don't think Kory's shivering on the bus.
He's in a warm war room bunker. I guarantee it.
Really? I don't think either of you are right. I'm sure he's still on the patio of Sassafras, guzzling champagne.
All right, Scott's right. He's right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so since we have fresh polling and we're right at the start of the campaign, why don't we start with that? So I'll just run through a little bit of what we know. Based on the baseline that Kyla has done in the days leading up to this, and she'll be refreshing it every night. Today's Relay Strategies polling is brought to you by Enbridge Gas, reliable, affordable natural gas to heat your homes and power our economy. So I would say reasonable, medium interest in the election. About 60% of the electorate say they're fairly motivated to vote in this election. The current vote intention is, Jesus, get your pencils out, people. Conservative 50, Liberals 25, NDP 16, Green 9. Looks like there could be a little bit of movement among women, but maybe men have already made up their mind by the looks of it. This is despite the fact that 65% of people think the province is on the wrong track. 69% say it's time for a change of government in Ontario, and 57% say the number one issue is not Donald Trump, but the cost of living. Healthcare and Trump are tied at about 20% of people saying those are the top issues. Ford's numbers up a lot from what I've seen in the past. Favorable 43, unfavorable 37. So his negatives look like they're significantly down. Marit Stiles still only less than half of the population can offer an opinion, 24 positive, 24 negative. Bonnie Crombie, the generous recipient of a long negative advertising campaign from the Conservatives, is at 28% favorable, 33% unfavorable. People that don't like Doug Ford, close your ears, but majorities of the province think Doug Ford is a competent person, a hardworking person, cares about people like them, and represents Ontario well. However, more than they think any of those things, they think he's interested in helping his friends in government. And lastly, is the early election an issue? 53% of Ontarians say there's a good reason to have an election. 47% say there's no reason to have an election. Looking under the hood, it doesn't appear that it's having any impact on vote. So, Deb, as our newbie, can we start with you?
Sure.
If you're the Conservatives, where do you go with that?
Well, you tied Trump tariffs to affordability, and that's your message for 20, whatever's left of the campaign, 3.5 weeks. Because I do think affordability makes sense as an issue for so many people. And there is no doubt on the heels of Saturday afternoon's announcement from the president that we've got the tariffs coming. They are going to hurt. And you make that particular issue, which the premier has decided he's running on, and the reason for calling this election, you make it about affordability. And I think you're hard to beat. And when you look at healthcare being so far behind, I don't think that's good news for Bonnie Crombie.
Right. Scott, what do you think this means for the remainder of the race?
It puts the Liberals, I'll leave the NDP to Jordan, and I've got a question about the NDP campaign because so far I haven't really understood it strategically in terms of the message track they've been following. But I think it puts the Liberals in a really, really difficult strategic spot, like in terms of making a core decision about what they say and how they try to punch through. The media, the talking heads, economists, elites, like everyone wants you to talk about tariffs and Trump. But if you talk about tariffs and Trump, you're only reinforcing these numbers and making it more likely that Doug Ford doesn't just win, but he wins every fucking seat in sight. And so you've got to figure out a way to capitalize and stay. You got to go to the body, right? Like if you punch at the head of tariffs, you're likely to, all your punches will miss. So you got to go to the body on healthcare and desire for change. But it's really hard because no one's going to hear that. You're not going to break through. It's going to be a pea shooter versus a cannon fire on Trump and tariffs. So, I think they've got to figure out if we stick to healthcare and time for a change, can we at least eclipse the NDP, put ourselves firmly and better in second spot, and then maybe if something breaks in the second half of the campaign, maybe good debate, we leverage that, and that puts us in a position to spring forward and make a move. That's going to require enormous discipline. You're going to have everybody, you're going to have the media like saying to you, come on, Bonnie, we want to hear about the goddamn Trump and tariffs. We don't want to hear your can line on healthcare. The candidates are going to freak and they're going to break and they're going to say at the doorstep, all we're getting is Trump and tariffs, give us that. So it's going to require enormous discipline on their part to say, you know what, we got it. We got to stick with the body, because if we go to the head, all our punches will miss and we'll lose. So I think it's really hard for them. I don't think they have a choice. I think they have to stay on this track, find ways to make a nod to tariffs and Trump, but then quickly get back to time for change, underlying discontent, family docs, that kind of thing. But it's really tough.
Scott, can I just ask you, why do you think they went on the safety message at the end of last week?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, they're not even sticking to the healthcare issue.
And a huge ticket price, I think, to put those barriers across all of the subway platforms. I mean, she hasn't come out with her cost of platform. She said
they must
she
think
would.
it works in downtown Toronto.
I
They
think
must
that's
think it
right.
is.
But it's a huge, like, potentially billion-dollar spend. That's what the
Oh, for fuck's
TTC
sake.
said.
Who's
But
paying
this
attention?
whole election is about
Come
spending
on.
billions. Deb.
Yeah,
It's about
whatever.
who gets to spend. It's
It
about who gets
depends
to
where
spend
you
the.
Yeah, I think the crime is
Oh,
less
sure
the,
it does.
the political
Yes.
crime there is less the
If
money.
you
and
spend
it's
on
more-
middlemen, lobbyists, buddies of Doug Ford, it's fine.
Oh, and
Hey,
we're
we're
off
off
and
to that.
running.
We're off to that. We're off to that kind of start. Jordan, let's swing around.
Yeah, I was
Let's
just saying it's
swing
more
around to
to,
you.
to what Scott said. Like I think there's a lot that can be said about Crombie's first week. Not much of it complimentary, but one of the things that they were doing.
Why? I actually don't think that. I think they've been
Oh,
pretty
come
good.
on.
Don't you?
No, I think that launch is going to go down in history as a what
Well, I
not
hate the
to
hats.
do.
Fucking Ford in his hats. Now
All
everybody's
right.
got to wear a hat. All right, I'll shut up.
No, everybody doesn't have
Including
to wear a
you.
hat. That's a choice.
It's
And
6
anyway,
o'clock in the morning. No one
we
wants to
can-
see my hair.
You'll get nothing and like it. You know, a talent of mine is that I can quote damn near 100% of the character dialogue from the movie Caddyshack. It's a dubious skill. That particular line is from Judge Smales, played by the great Ted Knight, to his nephew Spaulding, who can't decide whether to get a cheeseburger or a hot dog. But I think you can reasonably apply it to the battle for consumer choice and genuine competition in high-speed internet service. You'll recall that a federal cabinet order suggested our presenting sponsor TELUS be barred from accessing the fiber networks required to offer those services to new customers in Ontario and Quebec. The upshot? Consumers in those markets could lose out on lower prices, 19% lower in Ontario compared to a year ago, and also miss out on innovative service bundles. But what they're not doing is sitting quietly and liking it. I'll get to that part in a second. The two corporate giants in the region, the Bell and Rogers duopoly, let's call it Brogers, have been getting their say and for the moment their way. Their message has been amplified through the megaphone of a proxy organization, the CNOC, Competitive Network Operators of Canada, who've put forward arguments that closely mirror Brogers' own. A concerning alignment with the very entities they were meant to challenge. So whose interests are being served here? Consumers or corporations? I mentioned people are not sitting quietly and accepting all of this. There are over 200,000 signatures on a petition supporting TELUS's entry into Ontario and Quebec. These are 200,000 voices representing families and businesses who clearly don't like what they've been handed for years now, limited options and high prices. 200,000 voices demanding change in the form of true competition. You can add yours at demandmoreinternetchoice.ca. The question here isn't whether competition is good for consumers. It always is. The real question comes down to this. Are we going to listen to those voices or continue to protect the status quo? Jordan.
So, yeah, I think that actually she had stayed on the health issue pretty well. They'd had good discipline on that even leading up to the election. And that's why I was so surprised to see them move off that this week, because I think you're right, in terms of the dynamic, like for the non-Ford parties, so for the Liberals and the NDP, you're seeing two really different strategies, two really different approaches in terms of how they're trying to court that non-PC vote. So you've got the Liberals out there, at least until the latter part of last week, talking just about healthcare and trying to carve that out. And then you've got Stiles and the NDP going out, really trying to go a little bit on Ford's turf, toe-to-toe on the tariff stuff, tying that to affordability, and also trying to bring in some of the more scandally elements. So can you trust Ford as a good negotiator, for example, when he's pissed away $400 per household in Ontario on the Ontario Place spa and things like that. So I think that it's interesting. You're seeing those two different, like really radically different approaches, but the strength of Crombie's was in, like, you really have to do healthcare 87 different ways over the next few weeks, and so that they've already moved off of it in the first week, to me, was not an encouraging sign about how they were doing internally. But I know Scott wanted to talk about Margaret's campaign. You had a question.
Well, wait. I have a question.
Yeah, okay.
Scott
Sorry,
has
you had a question.
I
Go.
have a question. You're so
David,
anxious.
go get a cigarette.
Sounds, Scott.
Jordan, official opposition for 2 terms, right? The poll says that the NDP are considered more likely to do well on almost every issue set tested than the Liberals. And yet there they are, 16%, 9 points behind the Liberals, something is going very, very wrong. Don't they have to course correct almost immediately? Don't they have to do something to grab this race by the throat and change it?
I want to see what happens next week because I think there's a couple things going on. So the first is that there's always, and the Liberal brand in Ontario, as you know, does generally remain quite strong. And I think that what we're seeing as well,
unless I'm involved.
Yeah, you're far away from it, so it's whatever.
Herle and I can bust that rule.
You guys are here. It's okay. Crombie's campaign is marked safe from your assistance. So the thing here, I think, that has changed, of course, is also what's happening federally, right? So you have Trudeau's departure. And you've got, so there's obviously that irritant is a little bit gone. And I think that what you often see among sort of non-conservative voters in Ontario, people love to vote Liberal, right? And they just need like a little permission structure to go and vote Liberal. And so Trudeau's departure, I think, is definitely one that has provided a bit of a lift to those numbers for the Liberals here. I don't really think it all has much to do with what Crombie's doing in her campaign this week. I think that you're seeing some residual benefit from that. So as we see more people tuning in over the next week, I'm going to, if those numbers stay there in the next week, I would certainly be a lot more concerned. But right now, I don't think we're actually seeing the impact of the campaign yet. It's a bit early.
Hey, Deb, on the worst day of the 2018 campaign for the Liberal Party, I did not see 16%.
No.
Right?
And Jordan, I don't know what Marit's message was last week. I truly don't. We talked about healthcare for Bonnie. We talked about the fact that she pivoted way earlier than I thought she should have from healthcare. But Marit has a bus and she thinks we should negotiate. I truly don't know what her message is. And I'm somebody who pays attention like all of us here. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, as I said, her strategy is definitely different from Crombie. So she is taking it into Ford's territory to say that he's a bad negotiator, that, she's got some different ideas. We'll see if it works. I think that they are going to have to move to some of the areas of territory that are a little bit stronger for them. So that is getting into the ground, things like healthcare, education, social safety net. And I think there is opportunity, right? Because when we see what's going on with Trump and people are generally feeling very unsure about the future, we're seeing unemployment going up. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think that there's an opportunity there for the NDP because you can close ranks around some of those social safety net things, and people may look to somebody that they like. And Marit is not well known, but when she's introduced to people, generally she is better liked than Crombie, thanks to the assistance of some of the PC advertising. So I think that there's an opening there for her to kind of close that circle. But right now, it's been such a fire hose of news this week with Trump and tariffs. For sure, she's battling it out in the media cycle to get her message out, really right next to Ford. But I think that the strategy that the party is using is that they're trying to squeeze Crombie out, right? They're trying to show that the alternative to Ford is Marit, who's talking about those issues, who's capable of leadership, and who has a campaign that looks like a campaign.
That's what I don't get. That's what I don't get. I know you guys have been beating up on Crombie's campaign, but there's been 6 days, 5 of them about healthcare. I suspect the one day, in my view, was a mistake to switch to something else. It's probably because of those downtown ridings, like David said. But there's at least a coherent strategy there. You can detect that there is everyone else is talking.
And I love the bus. I'm just going to go on record. I love the bus.
I miss buses.
Yeah,
I miss them a lot.
But I don't
remind me of one of the Brexit doom buses,
Exactly. I think that was the intention.
Dying,
But Marit Stiles, I don't get the why go to the source of Ford's absolute strength. I don't think it positions her as the person best qualified to fight. I think it just rewards him. And I don't think she's squeezing out Crombie. I think she's squeezing out herself. I think that if as hard as it's going to be, given everything that's going on, the centrifugal forces of this campaign, if the Liberals can continue to pound on healthcare day after day after day, my guess is that will, at minimum, get them firmly into official opposition. So I don't really follow what the outcome of the NDP strategy is. I'll say one other thing, and this is coming out from a former comms director. Jesus Christ, I'm glad I'm not helping to run this campaign, because it's so impossible to be heard now. And you layer on top of it Trump and tariffs. So the news is choked with that and will be choked with that, at least for the next few days. like the opposition leaders in Ontario, like how do you get noticed? You're on CP24 as the 6th item for 40 seconds, and
None of
that's
that, none of
it.
that matters at all. People are going to hear two things. A, what is circulating about you organically on social? And second of all, what are you paying for people to see? Those are the
That is,
two
Yeah,
pieces of information
I
that
think
people are going
pay
to
is
get.
just going to be so critical.
it's all that
Right.
matters.
Well, just to
And-
close on what Scott's saying, look, I mean, we'll see if the strategy works. Like I do see it as a coherent strategy. I think that they're pretty clearly picking a direction,
It's
and
coherent, but is it good?
well, we'll see, right? Like, and I'm going to reserve judgment on it for at least a week. I want to see what the numbers do. But you know, Margaret's been going out. She's like the first day she hit 4 conservative ridings. Like they're really very clearly trying to take the fight to the PCs in those regions. So I think that's the organizing structure of the
in
campaign.
2
Now,
weeks, she
whether it's
won't
the
leave
right one,
downtown
we'll see.
Toronto. She won't. In 2 weeks, she will not leave downtown Toronto. She'll have no choice. She'll be clinging to Jill Andrews like a lifeboat.
Let's swing.
Set your watches. The doom
let's swing-
predictions have begun.
Okay, so our sponsor CN wants to keep the conversation going about Canadian things the Americans need and how those things will cost Americans a lot more money if this blanket tariff plan is real. Anyway, one of those things is potash. Potash is something everybody has heard of, but most people don't know much about. Potash is basically mineral salts, rich in potassium. Mostly it's used in fertilizers to help plants grow, and it's absolutely vital. American corn farmers, you know, the ones who produce the biggest crop in the United States and supply such a vast amount of food and ethanol to American consumers, simply cannot do without it. Ditto grain farmers. And yes, you knew this was coming. 90% of the potash used by American farmers comes from Canada. Canada, well, okay, Saskatchewan, is the biggest potash producer on Earth. A huge amount of it is carried to American markets by CN. CN connects Saskatchewan's potash mines directly to the U.S. heartland. Of course, slapping tariffs on Canadian potash would harm Canadian producers. It's a serious threat. But to be clear, contrary to what American voters are being told, America simply does not have the potash its farms need. It must buy Canadian potash. The second biggest producer is Russia. And any tariffs on potash will be paid by American importers, then passed on to American farmers and consumers. That's the way tariffs work. You actually have to wonder what American farmers think of all this, or if indeed they've even considered it. These proposed tariffs, if they are imposed, will tear into both Canadian and American economies like a buzzsaw. It will be pointless, needless pain. CN stands for Free, Unhindered, Fair Trade. Free trade is a win-win. A trade war is madness. Let's swing around to see if this thing could even become interesting. So, Ford is today all over American media. And and I think my sense is that's a good look for him, and that's a good place for him to be. And it totally cements his frame of the election about this is about the Trump and tariff issues and who can best deal with them. And obviously I can. I'm on fucking Fox News arguing our case. So who's Mart Stiles and Bonnie Crombie? So it feels like they're going to go hard on that message all the time, and that's the frame they want. But Jesus, those affordability numbers make me think there's another potential campaign out there. And I'm not against the Liberals' focus on healthcare. I think it's a very big vulnerability. And maybe between the two things, is there a risk, and I'll come back to you, Deb, on this, is there a risk that the Conservatives are seen, maybe to stretch an analogy, the way David Peterson was seen as more interested in Meech Lake than in the economic crisis that was facing Ontarians? Maybe this looks a little out of touch. Is there a chance that it looks a little out of touch?
Well, as I said at the outset, though, if he ties the tariffs to affordability, I think that's how you make it work and you're able to stick with it. I mean, Bonnie has announced a middle class tax cut, and I had her on my radio show on Newstalk 1010, and I said, look, no tax cut that I don't like. I love tax cuts. She hasn't even talked about that yet, though, which is kind of interesting because it's also a big ticket item. So obviously, Ford's not going to come forward with a tax cut that I can tell. He probably doesn't even want to talk about his 200 or 250 buck check that's still in the mail for some people. But if he talks about how your grocery bill is going to go up because of the tariffs, he talks about how your jobs are at risk because of the tariffs. If he talks about how mortgage rates may not actually be on the decline as we had hoped for 2025. All those are issues of affordability. And then he says, just as I did in the pandemic, I'm going to be there for you, your family, your business.
Well,
And
that's
that might be
the
the
magic trick, but Scott, is that invulnerable? I feel like if somebody had something to say about domestic issues, maybe that could break through, that maybe they could change the frame of this thing a bit.
I think that's the only play. So like there's no highway if you're the opposition campaigns that you can take into this election. You're going to have to sort of follow some backdoor pathway, right? That's up a mountain and through like a pass and so forth. And I do think there's going to be, in this week in particular, there's going to be kind of a quiet struggle to link affordability to the tariff issue. And so it's going to unfold for Ford in the way that Deb just described. I think for Crombie, they've got to make the argument, just as you said, David, that, look, it's all well and fine to go on Fox News and listen, when it comes to fighting Trump and tariffs, there's no difference between me and Ford, right? Like that's what I would be saying if I were the Liberals, right? What's the bargain, right? If you vote Liberal, you're going to get just as fierce a fight against Trump on tariffs. Absolutely. In fact, we'll go even harder. But at the same time, you require a premier who's going to not forget about everything else, who's going to make certain that all these issues, this is going to make our lives even harder and even less affordable. And you need a premier who's going to focus on that. And by the way, don't forget about the fact that family docs are going to be even harder for people to find. Are we going to end up in a situation where we're going to emerge from this Trump thing and we find out there's not just 2.5 million families without a family doctor? It's going to be 4. I'll focus on that. So try to make that linkage, but it's so hard because media is going to want to dump the second half of it. It's a complex message. It links to things that don't beg to be linked, but I think that's going to have to be the play.
Jordan, is there room to mock it a little bit? Because at the core of the way Trump talks about this, there's such a mano a mano underlying concept of me versus Trump. And who would you really send there? One of those two, Bonnie or Mart, or me, big burly Doug that can look him in the face and stare him down. Well, Ford's never going to fucking meet Trump, and it has nothing to do with that.
Oh,
right?
of course. Ford's not negotiating with Trump. Like,
Right.
this is, and I think
So is there a room to mock him a little bit about his pretense about his role?
I think maybe. Although it's tricky, right? Because right now, it's all a bit in the abstract, but this is going to become pretty real for people over the next few days. Layoffs are going to start pretty soon. I think the tone on it is going to be pretty dire, especially in the early weeks. And so that's delicate. And I also think that the ability to do that, you have to have a pretty confident principal who is very sure of their own projection. I have a hard time seeing that be super successful for either Mart or Bonnie in the current circumstance. But I do think it's interesting, like just to Scott's point about the difficulty of sort of tying some of the negatives that work against Ford. So either the failures on the policy level or his motivations that he's in it for himself and, it cuts all these deals to benefit his friends. Like that's actually, just to like circle back to what the NDP campaign is doing, that's one thing I like about what their strategy is that they've baked into it hits on the deals that he's done for his friends. Like they've rolled that right in. Like this guy's a bad negotiator. He's making you pay for stuff for his buddies. That's his record. And so it's allowing them to talk about some of those things, but it is very tough to knit those things in. And it's very difficult to actually get that out to reach voters. So I think it's a huge challenge. I do think that what we're going to also see is not just a shift in the issue set, maybe towards affordability concerns around the tariffs, but it's also like, it is that employment question. It is like, what's going to happen in our communities? It's like grocery prices, right? It's like all of these things that are actually going to become very specific quite quickly related to the tariffs. And so I think that there is something out there for the non-PC party that comes out sooner that says like, we're going to be here to kind of catch and take care of people through this crisis, and that has the ability to deliver that message.
The Ontario Real Estate Association, or OREA, knows more and more families are finding the lack of housing supply plus prohibitive government costs in Ontario are pushing the dream of home ownership further out of reach. A recent poll done for OREA by Abacus Data found that although 7 in 10 non-homeowners say they still dream of buying a home, nearly half have either given up believing they will ever own a home or are pessimistic about the possibility. That's why this week, OREA released their Ontario election platform titled A Home for Everyone 2025, putting forward pro-growth, pro-ownership, pro-affordability housing policies that will ensure future generations continue to have a shot at owning a home. From ending exclusionary zoning to tackling landlord and tenant board reform, OREA is proposing 10 bold actions to increase housing affordability and consumer protections in Ontario. Over the coming weeks, you'll be hearing more on how decision makers can implement pro-home ownership policies to end the housing affordability crisis. But for now, you can read OREA's full election platform at orea.com/platform.
I guess both for all of you, but I was specifically Jordan, the sort of whatever you want to label it, crap and corruption, in it for your friends, all of those messages. In my view, that's where Marit has been over the last period of time since she became leader, and it's not worked for her. She hasn't moved the numbers. I mean, even before Bonnie,
People agreed, Deb.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
They agree,
but
it doesn't drive their vote.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it can be the right message, but it's also in this environment, like whether it's getting delivered is a separate question, right?
But I think that if she heads down that path at all or weaves it in, as you say, I just don't think it is going to have any impact, regardless of whether the numbers say people agree. Because again, she hasn't broken through as opposition leader. And she had that window before she even had a liberal leader. She's had that window in the legislature, such as it is. And her message has, in my view, not broken through when she had the opportunity to sort of lay some groundwork for it.
Well, this is also the trap of official opposition, right? Sometimes you can get governmentitis without being in government. So I think actually I would make the case that for the NDP, being out of Queen's Park and being in a campaign environment is actually far more favorable for them. That's a big improvement.
That's a peculiar compliment. They're so out of touch with what real people think that a campaign is good. They go, hey, when we start talking about the green belt, people go like light a smoke. So I guess we got to change our message.
But Jordan,
listen, like
Jordan,
I think
there's something going on. I keep coming back to this, and you keep hating me for it. But I think this I think this is a genuine question. Yeah. There's something happening with the brand right now, I think, because federally, the most notable impact in the polls of Trudeau's departure and Carney's sort of emergence as the putative change has been a reduction in the NDP vote, which is exactly the opposite of what we anticipated. We anticipated that Trudeau's departure would free up some left-leaning elements of the Trudeau coalition for the NDP, and yet we're seeing the opposite movement there. So is there something about these times?
Like, why does that happen right away, right? Like, so they haven't selected Carney yet. So I don't think you yet have that movement happening. I think that right now is like a tough, the federal party is like nowhere in the news cycle in this period right now. Like I think like a dip federally in this period, to me, that's a natural consequence of some of what's going on around them. I wouldn't say that that's where things are necessarily going to land once the Liberal leadership is concluded. Like that shift of potential voters once they size up who the Liberal leader is, I think you're going to see that within a campaign period, assuming we go immediately after the Liberal leadership. I don't think you would see that right now.
But
those voters are not necessarily following the race, right?
2 words, Jordan: Jagmeet Singh. I mean, he's been a disaster as far as I'm concerned. I think is probably part of Marit's issue. I mean, I can't believe he's still the leader of the Democrats federally. He's been a disaster.
Wow.
Jordan's like, I thought you weren't Kory. I thought we had a new goddamn message.
Okay. I understand.
Conservatives all think the same shit, man.
I remember
same
the
Kool-Aid.
same, listen, like this is the same chorus that was like, in 2010 that Jack Layton's a used car salesman who's never gonna.
Man.
But look, I think I think that
I'm going to say something to you that Brian Mulrooney
Okay.
said to me when I
Go for
compared
it.
Turner and Dion, which is you, of all people, should never compare those two people.
Turner and
Isn't the
Dion.
truth?
That's a bit of a stretch. That's a
Isn't
bit
the
of a
ugly
stretch.
truth this? And that when Doug Ford is at 50%, when Donald Trump is laying on these historic tariffs, when there's no such thing as earned media anymore to permit you to, without cost, communicate your message to people who actually like are out there and ambivalent, then your strategies as opposition leaders are very, very, very limited in number. And that's why I think, as hard as it might be for the Liberals, I would do 20 more days on healthcare and hope that that separates you from the Liberals. Maybe you catch a break and Doug Ford fucks up in
From the
debate.
NDP, you mean?
Huh?
Separates you
Sorry,
from
it
the
helps you separates from the NDP. Maybe Doug Ford fucks up in the debate and you spring forward. I don't know what I would say to the NDP because I don't understand why they aren't competing for that ground. I don't understand if they want to hang on to those ridings in downtown Toronto, why they aren't making social services and healthcare and family docs a number one issue. So if I'm Crombie, I'm like, thank Christ she's decided to clear the zone and let me have this. And as unsatisfying as it may feel day after day when you look at the media reports, I would just stick with it because there are so few options available when a guy is at 50% and the landscape is as it is.
So just go back to something Deb's been saying, which is really interesting, which is the fusing of tariffs and affordability, which is obviously natural because we already have an affordability crisis. It's already the number one issue. And now prices for everything are going to go up, including groceries, which have been the flashpoint for affordability initiatives. So it does open up two different angles, right? Because if the tariff thing, the more it goes on, becomes about the impact it's having on ordinary people, then does the issue morph a little bit from who's best to stand up to Trump to who's going to take care of you through this period of time?
I think so, yes. I think that's how the issue set evolves. And I actually think that the fact that we're seeing the tariff announcement and that they're coming in quickly early in the campaign argues that there may be enough time for that shift to happen within the issue set during the campaign.
Sure.
I think that part of what we're seeing with the PC numbers being so stratospherically high right now is also driven by Trump in the news, Trump this week, the anticipation, all of that. Like, as that issue sort of rises in salience and people are following it, Ford's numbers are tracking with that. And that makes complete sense because he's been out there so visibly and he's really been able to tie himself to that. But I'm not sure that that lasts. Like, I really do think that when the impacts of that kind of come home and people are looking at in their own lives, I do think you see a different issue set surface where there is opportunity for the NDP and to some degree for Crombie. But it's interesting because I think for Crombie, like, I agree with Scott, like, I think that they made a smart pick on health, but I think that if you're going to make that pick, like, you absolutely have to hew to it. Like, you cannot stray from it. Like, you're
But
going to shoot your shot there.
You can
You
use
have to
health to
stick to it.
bridge to your narrative, David. I think you can, like, it fits into that narrative, which is, look, man, you're going to have to ask yourself, who's going to also pay attention to the things you rely upon when times get dark, and times are getting dark. And that means, right, making certain you've got a family doctor. That means making certain that government's going to be there to have your back. That means taking measures to offset the steep price increases that we're going to face. Like, I think you can bridge to that. My worry, of course, and again, this goes back to there aren't many good options. My worry would be that as soon as you start to move it toward affordability, even if that's the key issue, it starts to sound like an economic issue, and that is a natural advantage. It's much easier for Doug Ford. He can be 3 days late to that message and be 10 times more credible on it. That's the challenge for the Liberals and for the NDP.
Understands people like you. It's not a thing that normally most people agree with about a politician. He's been in office for 6 years and people still fucking say that about him.
Yeah.
Right?
Because he's folksy. That's who he is, right? That's the authentic Doug. And that's how he comes across. And I just will say on the conversation we were just having, I mean, he proved it in the pandemic. People who didn't vote for him said, oh, kind of glad he's there, kind of glad he's getting us through this. And as much as we don't want to talk pandemic in most circumstances, it actually is something that I think is a proof point for him.
And the obvious way to bruise him on that and take some of that magic off of him was to say he's just trying to cash in with this election. It's wrong to have an election now in the midst of this crisis. And after 5 days, I think we know the jury's in. That hasn't stuck, and it's not going to stick. And again, like, man.
Yeah, he's at his worst when he appears self-serving in some way. So the challenge is bringing that into this campaign somehow.
TikTok has been a major champion of Canadian creators, musicians, and small businesses who are using the platform to reach a global community of over 1 billion users. TikTok Canada has a team of hundreds of local employees dedicated to supporting the success of Canadian creators and businesses on its platform. The federal government, however, has ordered TikTok to shut down its Canadian offices. While the TikTok app will remain available in Canada, TikTok's hundreds of Canadian employees will lose their jobs, eliminating important roles and the support that's provided for the over 14 million Canadians who use TikTok. TikTok Canada believes it's important to have employees in Canada, supporting Canadian creators and advertisers, paying Canadian taxes, and operating under Canadian law. Facts matter. Simply put, shutting down TikTok Canada eliminates jobs and stymies investments in Canada. Stay tuned over the next month to hear more about the work that TikTok Canada's employees do to support the success and safety of Canadians on TikTok. So let's just swing around federally for a few minutes and see what's been happening there. So tariffs came on this weekend. Trudeau, I thought, gave an outstanding speech. I thought he gave an outstanding set of remarks. And I'm not in a position to judge the economics of the response, but everybody pretty much seems to be on board with it. So I presume it's at least a consensus decision, if not a good decision. I'm interested that Poilievre obviously felt he needed to wade into this and look like he's a player on it and have a policy position. And it was a reasonably robust one. And it's obviously turned into the flashpoint between the top 2 Liberal leadership candidates, and taking a page out of Doug Ford's book. Chrystia Freeland was on Fareed Zakaria yesterday, and I think she's doing on CNN. I think she's doing some other American media. She's calling in favors from her time as a senior journalist down there and the people that she knew. Scott, you see anything changing in the federal domain in the last week?
No. I had the same. We'll start with the incumbents, if you will, before we get to the Liberal race. I think I agree with everything you said. I thought that Trudeau was outstanding. I thought he managed to capture the tone just right. It's harder if you're actually in charge because you can't be quite as firebrand, but I thought that he did a good job of balancing the anger that Canadians feel and are going to feel with the actions. And that is going to come at a consequence. I think Trump, when he calls him today, is going to call him to say, I'm actually making you 30. So, if you fight back, I'll make it harder for you. But there's no way to deal with a bully other than to say, fuck you, and try to get on a stepladder and punch him in the nose. I thought that, I really thought that Poilievre, it was interesting. They are clearly conceding that the election they wanted is not the election they're going to get. It doesn't mean that they're not going to still get a change election and that they aren't completely in the driver's seat, but they are having to edge out in the harbor much more on tariffs and Trump. They're confronted with the same challenge. So do I talk about it? Do I not? Do I just stand back and let my enemies and my opponents unravel? But he's clearly feeling he has to show some leadership on it. He's still in cake and eat it too. We're only going to impose tariffs on those things that hurt America and don't hurt Canada. We're all going to have to come to this question of energy before very long. But I thought it was a wise, and it's almost exactly what I think I would have advised him to do in terms of his intervention. On the leadership, I just think that there's no oxygen in the room for anything but Carney. And to be honest with you, I think Carney's been too gray, too flat, and he's got to step it up. I think his interventions have been just.
Well, but just stop. Are you saying that because you assume the leadership is won and he should be fighting the general already? Because it looks to me like he's still focused on winning the leadership.
That's exactly what I think. I don't think that the party has. I think it's declared itself fundamentally, at least using the independent measures available to us, that it is not willing to go to Christie has an answer. It just doesn't make sense to them in a time where change is everything. And so there may be question marks about Carney. There may be lots of incomplete sentences about him. But I think that the party thinks that, well, that's not just our best, but our only bet. And I think he's got to pivot now and really start to bring it. And I think he needs to get out of his safe, moderate place. I think he's got to be more of a firebrand. He can afford to edge out more than the prime minister. He can be more voluble. He can be as voluble as Ford. And I don't think he's been that. I don't think it's all been very thoughtful, interesting, but he looks like he's a 9-year incumbent. He doesn't look like he's a first-year insurgent.
Yeah, I was definitely struck.
I
thought Freeland looked more passionate, more energetic, more dynamic on this issue last week than Carney did by a country mile.
Yeah, and the word you use, Scott, in all of what you said is safe. And that feels to be how they're running his leadership. It's a safe position for him to be in, which may work very well given the dynamics and the other contenders and where we are in politics federally, but it's not a great look.
Why? What's not looking good about it, Deb?
It doesn't, and listen, I am not the target audience, but it's very flat. It's very, we talked about you looking gray, David. It's a very gray look for him.
He's got to be better than you, Dave. I mean, that's the rule of thumb.
It doesn't
I would certainly
inspire.
expect that.
It doesn't inspire in the least.
Right.
Jordan, more energy around the campaign and him.
Well, I mean, I'm the audience for none of these things either, but I have to say, I wasn't blown away by Trudeau's speech. I still think when he gets the serious speech voice on, it's brutal. But I thought what was so striking about that speech, and the reason why I think so many people liked it, is that you saw Trudeau doing Canadian patriotism, which is something you haven't seen forever from him. And I actually think that, a lot of the response of like, where was that guy is really about that, which I think is maybe an interesting observation for incoming Liberal leadership candidates.
Hey, and Jordan, just in our ongoing little dialogue about this, Jagmeet gave us a little zig on the election timing
or
last
did he?
week. Just a little zig.
Yeah.
And I note that Angus Reid has already produced pretty much exactly the numbers that I was calling for. 40, 30, 15. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Look,
Deb, in previous shows, I've been saying that if the numbers at the end of the leadership are 40, 30, 15, the NDP aren't going to force an election this spring.
What did I say a few minutes ago? Two words. Jagmeet Singh. It's a problem.
So I actually don't think that there's a zigzag there. What I think you're seeing is the awkwardness of the position that he's in right now, which is that he's trying to get into this story. He needs to be able to say clearly that he's going to pull the government down at the earliest opportunity. But at the same time, he can't say that he would not support or stymie any kind of a relief package that's coming through. So he's trying to do all these things at the same time. And I don't think it landed very well because they ended up with
record.
They ended up, well, hold on. They ended up with a story that had him going back on pulling down the government immediately. But they did go out the next day to correct, which, this is never a good thing. But I actually think what that says to me is that there's not a fundamental shift in how they're planning on voting. What they're trying to signal is openness on some of the measures for response.
But how does it play out in the real world?
Did not go well.
I don't get. I don't think that they clarified it because, on planet Earth, what happens in what order?
People in the liberal camp are going to continue to live in eternal optimism that he's going to change his mind. I understand that.
It's not so much that, but I'm just trying to follow his logic. If he wants to support a package, then that means the House reconvenes. That means there's a throne speech.
No.
That means he does not vote down the government. It means
I'm going to tell you two things.
In order for it to be introduced, he has to vote confidence. So he's not actually taking the government down at his first available opportunity. Then the government's able to move forward with its legislative package in support of the tariffs.
You're thinking too literally.
Well, I know it's horrible of me to actually try to decipher the true meaning of his words.
Yeah. Don't go that deep. So I think what he's looking for is he's wanting
a lifeline.
Yeah, well, no. He was calling for all party consultation with all the leaders about what the relief package is. There's a whole whack of stuff they can do with it. Yeah, whatever. There's a whole whack of stuff that they can do without recalling the House. But the fundamental fact remains, it's not in his interest to give a new Liberal leader any more time to establish themselves with Canadian voters before going to an election. It is not in his interest. So that fundamental strategic imperative still remains the same. And so there's still every reason for him to pull the plug at the end of March, which I think he has to.
Now, the bottom line is, it is still the case that you can add together the Liberal and NDP number in Ontario and it doesn't equal the Ford number. And you can add the Liberal and NDP number together federally and it doesn't equal the Poilievre number. So remains where we are. And, you know, we don't have to solve it all today because we're back tomorrow. So we close this out with a blessing or a curse. Who's got a blessing or a curse they want to throw at somebody?
Oh, I have a curse.
I got a curse.
All right.
Oh, of course.
Jordan, you go, and then Deb, and then Scott.
It's just a Crombie and the tour team of her campaign. Friends, it is a visual medium. It is a visual medium out there. The no silly hats rule definitely still applies. There is, you know, think about how the words on your bus get chopped up when you use your bus as a backdrop. Like, just all of those things. It seems like little tradecraft stuff, but it makes such a big difference. People are just going to be catching a glimpse of a picture of your campaign out of the corner of their eye while they're waiting forever for the fucking subway on CP24. So make it a good image. That stuff does make a difference.
Excellent. Thank you, Jordan. Deb?
The curse is the Protect Ontario sweatshirts that all Conservative candidates are made to wear. They're awful. No one looks good in a sweatshirt.
I'll bear that in
David,
mind.
David, I will point out to those only listening that David is wearing a sweatshirt.
I know.
And it looks like shit.
If you're gonna listen to me at this time of the day, you really should have the sound off. Anyway, the visual off. Thank you, Scott. What do you got?
All right, my blessing is going to serve as a sort of declaration of conflict. It will come as no surprise to people that I'm a Liberal, but my blessing goes out to my two oldest sons, who startlingly, after growing up in a political household their whole life, Herle is the godfather of one of them. These guys were steeped in politics. They've never shown any interest in electoral partisan politics their entire lives, quite the opposite. And yet now
Let's be clear, they had contempt for us, Scott. They
had absolute contempt. And they thought to themselves, why would I join a job that looks so much like it only comes to ruination and failure, as set by the example of my father and godfather. But both boys on their own steam have gotten involved in the Ontario Liberal campaign. It's stunning. And they'll be mad at me because, you know, they don't want anyone to know they're related to me. And fortunately for them, Reid is a common enough name that no one automatically makes the association. But both my guys are out there working on the election campaign, so stick to it. It's fun to watch them getting involved in electoral politics. And I hope they somehow turn this massive lead of Ford's around.
All right. My blessing goes out to Bonnie Crombie. Don't listen to all the naysayers. You know, tour, a lot of people are making notes about the tour, and maybe there's some work that could be done there on the visuals. But I've loved the energy, and I've loved the focus on healthcare. I think your campaign is on the right track, and I think you should keep it up and listen to what people on this said today. And healthcare. Keep driving it. All right. That's our show for today. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsors, CN, Aurea, TikTok Canada, and our polling sponsor, thank you for that, Enbridge. I'd like to thank, obviously, all of the accursed who watched or listened to this show today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of it. And thank so much my friends on this panel, Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, and Deb Hutton, for being with us today. We'll see you again bright and early tomorrow morning. In the meantime, take care of yourselves.